Welcome to Spot Check, the weekly video update series for The Greatest Unreality, a dissertation about Dungeons & Dragons. I'm Nick Miser. So this week we're going to be talking about people's first experiences in gaming and how the type of game that they come to shapes the experience that they play, and conversely how gamers who like to bring people into the hobby might prefer certain types of games or presenting games in certain ways over other types of games or other types of presentations. Before we get into that, a few bits of news. First of all, over at The Geek Anthropologist, which I'll link in the notes, I'm going to be posting these videos. Now, if you're watching this, you've probably seen all of the videos already, but you might be interested in some of the other awesome things that are being posted and talked about at The Geek Anthropologist. If you like people talking about geeky things and thinking carefully about them, then you should check out that blog. Second, I will be scheduling my Q&A for some of the Kickstarter backers in the near future, so keep an eye out for that. You should be getting an email if you're one of the people at that level and you happen to be watching. And looking towards the future a little bit, I'm going to be headed towards GaryCon next month, and I get to spend some good time transcribing between now and then. And so I'll be able to share some bits and pieces with you of those transcripts as the weeks progress in these episodes that are to come. So, like I said, I want to talk about types of games or considerations that people have when bringing new people into the hobby. And these are based on interviews that I've had and other reflections as well, but primarily looking at interviews that I've done, specific things that people have told me. Now, one of the things that's worth bringing up when we're thinking about people bringing new gamers into the hobby is the concept of theme. What kind of game, what is the game about thematically? So if I think back to an interview I did in New York with James Nostak, he mentioned a game that he really likes, Steal Away Jordan. And this is a game that is thinking very carefully and trying to create sort of empathy between players and the experience of having been a slave in the American South. So it's kind of a heavy game, something that's really very emotionally affecting, at least according to James. For him, it does things like you don't even get to name your character. The slave master does that and does lots of things to help people think through what that experience could have been like. Now, that's a very interesting game, and for some people, that might be the game that they're waiting for to make them try out role-playing games. But as James brought up, if you have a bunch of people over for a dinner party, then they're probably not going to want to play Steal Away Jordan that night. So it's something that people who are actively bringing others into the hobby encounter a lot, of thinking about what type of genre people are most likely to be willing to interact with. So that's the first consideration I see. One of the other things, not necessarily a consideration of shaping what games people are going to play, but as an anthropologist, observing when people are brought into a gaming group for the first time and are identified as a virgin player, as Liz called her new players in Texas. I watched Liz explaining the game to the new player. Billy was his name. And by explaining the game to Billy, Liz was also establishing a set of understandings for the group as a whole about what gaming means in that particular context. So it's a cause for reflection and definition of the game, reflecting on and establishing a group identity with the others who you play with. And that's something that we see anthropologically whenever we're dealing with insiders and outsiders, bringing people from the outside in, or even sometimes when they're being kept out. A lot of the establishment of group identity happens at that level when you're called upon to explain to someone what it is that we do, who we are, whatever that we might be, and in this case, gaming. Now, the last thing I want to talk about today comes from an interview I did in Seattle with a woman named Jessie. Now, Jessie and her partner Kevin, living in Seattle, have had experience mostly with more recent editions of the game. Jessie has only played 4th edition. Kevin has played 3rd edition, 4th edition, play tested a little bit of the next edition that's coming out. And I was asking them about their understanding of older versions of the game, which is something that they have not spent a lot of time thinking about or talking about, like a lot of gamers that are out there, I think. And it was very interesting to hear some of the things they had to say. So Jessie, talking as someone who'd only been playing for about a year or two, said that her understanding of the development of the game was that over time, they, meaning the designers, put rules in place, and I'm kind of quoting her here because that makes people feel more comfortable with it. So the idea that over time rules were introduced into the game to make people feel comfortable with the concept of role playing and to kind of create boundaries and guide them in certain ways. And now she says that was only theoretically to help people because for her, those rules proved very intimidating. And that's something that Sarah, the outsider anthropologist that I was talking about last week, mentioned as well. Is coming to a new game or to gaming in general can be a very intimidating experience. Now, one of the most common things I've heard people say is important to them in gaming is the idea that anything is possible. If you can imagine that your character would attempt something, then they can try and do that. And so it seems like games that push that concept to the foreground with as little to distract the new player from it as possible will tend to be more effective or potentially more effective at introducing new people to gaming. And in my observations, I have noticed that people who spend a lot of time playing with new players will tend to focus on, you could call it rules light, one of the words that's kind of thrown out there in the community. But I think that the looking at rules complexity is actually a little more complicated than just are there a lot of rules or a little bit of rules, because the location of those rules matter. There are things like upfront rules complexity. So if you think about character generation, that's something that Jessie reflected a lot on as something that was a difficult thing for her to jump into, looking at 4th edition character generation, which is a very complicated sort of thing. There's also complexity that comes in the middle of play, things like related to those character build ideas. How is combat going to be resolved? What choices is the character going to have to make? Are there a lot of rules that they have to know to translate those decisions into reality? Or back-end complexity, where if there is a dungeon master or someone facilitating the game, then they might have a lot of complexity that's going on in their heads that they're processing through that doesn't feed out to new players coming in. And I see that happening a lot when I watch a dungeon master interacting with the new players. I know some of the things that the dungeon master is thinking about, but not all of those come out to the player who's just experiencing, I say I want to do X, you tell me to roll a dice, and then you tell me what happens. And so those are some things I think that go into when gamers are thinking about drawing new people into the hobby, things that are going through people's heads and things that affect the sort of experience that people are having when they game. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. If maybe you find opposite experiences. I know that I'm dealing with a very small sample size here in social science terms. And so I want to broaden my understanding of what's going on out there as much as possible. As always, I want this to be collaborative. And so tell me, what experiences did you have when you first played? What things were off-putting to you? What things helped you transition into the game? I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you all next week.